Everyone, we've got a few more people coming through. Just give everybody another minute or so. We'll try and start more or less to time. Give it perhaps just another minute. Okay. Well, we might start just making sure that we've got enough time for presentations today. I'd like to say welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this. I think this is our third research forum for 2024. My name is Leanne Wood. I'm the manager for research evaluation and advocacy at Anglicare Southern Queensland. And before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the First Peoples of the various lands from which we gather today. Here it's the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and their care of and spiritual connection to country, to land, sky and water. I'd like to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people who are joining us today, and respectfully recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded. A couple of quick housekeeping things. Everybody should be on mute. Please just use the chat for questions. We will have a few minutes later on if people have got questions that they'd like to ask. And then we should be able to just unmute you, or we can certainly use the chat. Please be aware that the webinar is being recorded. So this is, as I said, it's our third research forum for 2024. We have a series that are facilitated by our research evaluation and advocacy team. Online today, I think we have our director, Stephen Harrison, and Sarah Maris, who's our strategic advocacy lead. So the aim of those forums is to showcase the findings of our ASQ research partners, as well as our own research projects. And we hold those webinars, as I have said, 3 or 4 times a year on a range of topics and projects. And today we're highlighting some research from Anglicare's Seed Grant program. And that brings together staff-driven research ideas and academics for collaborative projects. And we're also highlighting a student project that's been shaped by Anglicare's needs and interests and undertaken over the past year. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Sue Montgomery, who's our Group Manager for Home and Community, and whose passion project this home sharing project is. Sue's going to provide just a short introduction to the projects and also some background to Anglicare's interest in home sharing. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. I'm the Group Manager for our Home and Community Services, and my role at Anglicare is overseeing a really large group of wonderful people who deliver home and community in-home visiting services and centre-based respite services to people who are mainly elderly and over 65. These projects, this is a bit of a passion of mine. These projects, the concept for them started many years ago when we were thinking about, we've done a range of intergenerational programs at Anglicare before. So we've got, preschool students going into our residential aged care facilities. We've got our schools visiting with our home and community clients. So we've been sort of playing in this space of intergenerational community connection to increase social supports, reduce social isolation and those sorts of things. And we did apply for an innovation fund a number of years ago, hoping the government would fund a program like this. But we're very fortunate that we have a very supportive CEO and who's funded these research seed grants. The idea for this started again with a conversation with Sue Cook, our CEO, around, can we really make this happen? And Sue was the one who encouraged me, and with Leanne's help, to apply for these seed research grants, and we were successful at getting those. So really this really fits in with Anglicare's strategy around, being that sort of market leader in home care, but also addressing the housing crisis that we have at the moment. So I don't need to tell anybody probably about the rental affordability issues that we have in Queensland and in Australia at the moment, availability of housing stock, etc. So we sort of had this idea, and looking at some of the census data. So from 2021, there's over 12 million spare bedrooms in Australia, and the stats indicate that over 80% of homeowners have at least one spare bedroom in their home. And there's over 1 million people in Australia who have more than 3 spare bedrooms. So when we were thinking about, we have people who often live in their own home and own their own home, but then have needs for supports or social connection from other people. And then we have a whole lot of younger people who are suffering from, rental affordability stress at the moment. So that's really where our idea came together, to partner with a couple of universities to really look at co-designing and researching what would that look like, because there have been models overseas for this before, but they weren't really sustainable or ongoing over a number of years. So really for me, it was around what could we do in this space to talk to the different cohorts of people to find out how we could co-design a model that's going to be sustainable, that's going to support this sort of intergenerational sharing of housing in a mutually beneficial way for all parties, and finding out what would make that secure and safe for people and affordable, and, seeming that could address a few issues at the same time. So I'm so excited that we had both University of Queensland, through the Bachelor of Social Science students, really keen to partner with us to look at a couple of cohorts, and I won't steal their thunder because they're going to be presenting to you later, but also that we were successful in the research seed grant and partnering with University of Sunshine Coast, and sort of really expanding that into co-designing the service model, and then asking people what would that look like. And obviously that's with a view to pitch it back to our CEO for something that, might be able to be supported through Anglicare as a trusted brand going forward, to improve the situation for everybody. So that's sort of my summary. So thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Leanne, I think, again, to do some more introductions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sue. That's a great setting the scene for us, I think. So we're going to start with the students, and I'd like to introduce our speakers from the University of Queensland, Sarah Hodson, Wish Wayworth, Mia Guild and Erin Davenport. The students have just completed a full-year course in the Bachelor of Social Sciences at the University of Queensland that enabled them to work on a real-world project that's with an industry partner from government, community or corporate. So their presentation is going to start today with a short video presentation which they developed for their assessment. I've seen it. It's great. And then they're going to, make some sort of a little bit of a commentary and answer any questions. So I will hand over to, I think is it you, Sarah?
Yes. Well, thanks for the introduction. Our project, we sort of wanted to focus more specifically on different cohorts within the co-share model. So it was proposed by Sue that we look at care leavers, so youth who have aged out of the foster care or residential care system and are struggling to find housing. So that was our target cohort for this project. And throughout our research, we've been looking at the opinions and perspectives of care leavers as well as older people for their opinions on co-sharing. So I'll show you the video. Can you see that?
Yep.
Contemplating co-sharing.
The issue of housing continues to be a major concern in Queensland as housing affordability continues to decline. Also, as the population ages, elderly isolation and loneliness have become a more prevalent issue. Internationally, a number of intergenerational co-sharing models have been implemented successfully to combat these social issues and create a sustainable housing solution. However, there has been no research into the initiative within an Australian context. This is why Anglicare Southern Queensland is proposing a similar co-share model based on a support-driven exchange to provide a stable housing solution for care leavers who are young adults leaving foster care or residential care and are at greater risk of experiencing homelessness, with the aim to pair them with an elderly homeowner to provide companionship and potentially informal care to those who may lack support and face feelings of loneliness and isolation.
As such, this research aims to gain a better understanding of the opinions and willingness to be involved in a co-share model from both stakeholders. This includes how they envision this model could be implemented sustainably. To do this, our research aims to reveal 1. What are the elderly and care leavers' opinions on sharing a home? Are these opinions shared or divided? 2. What do the elderly and care leavers believe would make a co-sharing living situation fair and equitable? And 3, how willing are the elderly and care leavers to be involved in this co-share model? What are the positives and negatives that they see towards this model?
In order to conduct this research, a qualitative method was adopted in the form of 4 one-on-one interviews with care leavers and 2 focus groups with elderly participants, recruited through Anglicare's Respite Centre. A thematic analysis process revealed 4 key themes: compatibility, fairness, adaptability, and security. The first theme, compatibility, was highlighted by both participant groups. There was a level of uncertainty surrounding who they would be sharing their space with, including concerns of conflicting lifestyles, habits, and personalities.
I think that our biggest problem of living alone is disturbing it by having somebody there who's not compatible.
However, there was a general willingness to form these connections, and one elderly participant group discussed the importance of listening to form relationships. Both participant groups identified that the model goes beyond a solely transactional relationship and depends on social compatibility to allow for loyal connections between these 2 parties.
I think it depends on the person. It kind of just depends on what your relationship is like or how it tends to be when you first meet them. So if you click, it depends on the energy. You can kind of tell when you first meet them.
The second theme that emerged was fairness, as participants reflected on how this model could be implemented with focus on sustainability and stability.
There has to be a two-way street. If there's not a two-way street, it won't work.
The idea of creating a fair exchange of benefits, including support, companionship, and stability, is one that is reflected strongly throughout social exchange theory, which revolves around creating a practical equilibrium through a reciprocal exchange. To achieve reciprocity within the exchange, participants identified that clear communication of the costs and rewards involved in the model would need to be discussed. Thirdly, the theme of adaptability revealed varied opinions. For the care leavers and elderly participants who had previously lived with strangers, adaptability appeared to be less concerning as there was a greater understanding for the adjustments required to form a comfortable living situation.
It depends on the person they are and whether they are willing to adapt to your ways as you would adapt to their ways.
The care leavers in particular were open to adapting to the change of living with someone with a generational gap. However, some elderly participants struggled with the idea of adapting their lifestyle to a stranger. Participants expressed feelings of concern about adapting the details of their routines around another, like having to navigate different TV programs. The final theme our research highlighted was that both care leavers and elderly homeowners stressed the importance of security. For elderly participants, security concerns revolved around personal and property security.
I've had people in and I've had stuff lost and go missing, so I'd really love to trust them.
To combat this, discussions around conducting background checks were raised by both care leavers and elderly to ensure the safety of participants. For care leavers, housing security and stability were the main concerns.
I wouldn't want the old person to be in a bad mood and just kick me out because they just didn't want me there anymore.
In saying this, care leavers also found that the model would provide a greater level of housing security as it creates another housing option to prevent homelessness.
Co-sharing model proposed by Anglicare between care leavers and elderly homeowners aims to address significant current societal issues, including housing instability, youth homelessness, elderly loneliness, and social isolation. From the participants we interviewed, care leavers appeared to have an interest in being involved in the model, whilst the elderly participants seemed to be more weary of how it would be implemented. Anglicare continues to work with other stakeholders to introduce this co-share model and is looking to engage variances, including additional demographics to the model.
Thank you to our instructors, Anglicare Southern Queensland, and everyone involved in this research. Without your valuable support and input, this research would not have been possible.
Right, so beyond that video, I would also like to talk about a bit of the implications from our research. We didn't have time to get into it during our video, but so based on our findings, we found that participants were generally willing to participate in this co-sharing model, but there were many different wants and needs from various groups, not only differences between the older participants and the calibers, but also differences within the cohorts themselves. And so what we found is that it would be very important if this model were to be successful in that checks and balances, as well as some sort of moderation from an external party to be involved in the process, such as like ensuring that there are security checks before the participants of the model meet each other, and also systems to ensure that like they continue to be happy within this arrangement, and that there is no obscene power imbalances between any party, and to ensure that everybody feels comfortable, everybody feels safe to be a part of this model, not only before it starts, but also as the program goes on.
The other thing that we realised was that everyone had like a really positive thing to say about Anglicare, and they would love to see like contribution with like Anglicare into the model. So having maybe as an external figure that they can go to for support and stuff like that as well, they seem to respond to that really well. And they also talked about, so with the compatibility, we were talking about maybe getting personality matches, maybe doing a personality test to do like a bit of a matchmaker kind of situation for the care leaver and the elderly participants. Yeah. Should we move on to questions, do you think, or do you want us to talk more about what we did?
Look, I think questions would be great. That was really interesting. I think that it's some really thoughtful analysis as well, and particularly, I was really interested in the that people were so explicit about the importance of having that backbone organisation like Anglicare to do this, just be there as a support. But other people may well have questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask anything at this point? All good. We will have opportunity afterwards because we are, we're on a theme here. And so once Anna's done her presentation, there may well be other things that people would like to ask that capture, both presentations as well. So I might introduce at this point from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and I'll just acknowledge first of all that we also have Trudy Flynn here. Trudy is also a key part of the research team from the University of the Sunshine Coast. And actually, I'm just seeing, Anna, I can't actually see you on my screen. I am hoping that you haven't dropped out somewhere. You there?
I'm here, yes. Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Anna McKinlay is a research fellow and a consulting researcher with a background in architecture, urban design, and sustainability. And Anna's field of expertise is housing preferences, so perfect match for this project, and the influence of government policy and industry in this space. Anna's currently working on some projects involving social change towards more equitable built environments and better dwellings. So, yeah, we've got a perfect match here. And I'll turn over to you, Anna.
Okay, I'll start sharing if I can do that. There we go. Is that coming up okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So, going on in some ways from the UQ project, this is the second part of this sort of home share project. And I want to start my presentation with, well, why home sharing makes sense. And Sue touched on this before, but I'll show you a couple of the longer term housing trends. If my computer will forward, here we go. So we're all very aware of the housing affordability crisis. So this increase in housing debt and people taking out large mortgages and potentially not being able to pay them back, but also that rent price increase that's progressively gone up and up. And I don't want to go too much into that because Anglicare itself has done some very impressive research on these, how unaffordable rental is and how unavailable rental is for lower income, middle income couples. And it's worse still for singles. So there's this increasing housing costs that we have, and it's been trending up and up over a generation. We can see that evidence of it going quite significantly up. But there are a couple of housing trends that in some way conflicts with this limited housing picture. And that, as Sue touched on, is this idea of extra housing, a oversupply of not the house, but the elements within the house. So Australia has some of the biggest housing in the world. The size of our newly built houses are 50% increase in one generation. So the figures show that we're on par with America, but we're still one of the top 4 for large dwellings. And of course, Australians feel the need for large dwellings and we want to use our large dwellings, but there is this abundance of spare rooms. So we talk about a supply issue of there's not enough housing supply, but an overabundance of built form. And so it's this conflict between those two. And why this is not such a good thing is because we've built this built form, we've used the materials, we have to heat and cool these things, we have to light them. We've got that suburban expansion happening. So we've got these large homes, which is nice, but are we using those homes effectively to house our population? The other interesting conflicting bit of data is this household size decrease. Again, over a generation, the size of our households has gone down. So that's the amount of people living in a house, and it's reduced. It's reduced, but the housing being built for these households has not reduced at the same rate in the same way. So there's a slight pickup in units available for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, but overall we're still building 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom homes. And this leads to a lower, what we call utilisation rate of our housing. And that also leads to a lower population density in the suburbs. Again, spreading our suburbs further and further out into the suburbs and agricultural land. Okay, too far. So this household size decrease has also been with the types of household changes. So we have more single household persons and couple households than we did a generation ago. Family size is smaller, and we've also got an increase in lone parent families. So this family size is smaller, less children per couple, increasingly more single parents. The typical house that's being built and that we're living in is for a nuclear family. It's designed and primarily only affordable for a couple, and it's made for a couple with children. And it leads to questions about, well, why is our housing stock not more flexible for different types of households? So the, don't know if the pointer comes up. The share housing we're talking about is this group households. That's where our share housing would fit into this diagram. But the segment that is growing the fastest is this quarter here, this lone person households. And it's a quarter of all households, a lot of them living in 3-bedroom places. As Sue said, 80% have at least one spare bedroom. Many of them put that to good use, but also there are many that have multiple spare bedrooms. And how are we using that facility when there's a shortage of housing? With that lone person households, the most significant age group for that is this over 65. 42% of singles households are over 65. So that is a quite significant number of our elderly living on their own. Part of this is people living longer. Part of it is divorce rates, particularly as you age, there's still divorce rates happening there beyond the family sector. It's also, for this age group, are relatively economic stable. So there's less pressure for them to downsize, less pressure for them to go and find a smaller accommodation. They can stay in their family homes because they don't have the same economic pressures that many younger families are having. But this living alone is not ideal for aging. It's not ideal for anyone. Sorry, flicking through there. So for anyone, loneliness and social isolation can be a problem, can affect you mental health and physical health. We talk about socialization and isolation and loneliness. There's very similar things, but they are separate. So you can be well connected but still feel lonely. You can be isolated but not feel lonely. So loneliness is this perceived lack of companionship. But the effects of that overlap relatively significantly. So it's a poorer quality of life. There's this psychological distress and often mental illness. When we live on our own, we get into poor health habits. Things like inactivity, not sleeping so well, staying up late, smoking, drinking. These things are more likely to happen when you live alone. High blood pressure and impaired immune function. So these are factors for anyone who is feeling isolation and loneliness. But as you age, there's also links to increased rates of cognitive decline. That development of dementia happens at a faster rate in bigger numbers for people who live on their own. So it's not a good thing for our elderly. The rates of how many of our elderly are feeling this vary a bit according to which surveys. So between 19 and 16% of elderly often experience loneliness, and as much as 32 to 46% report feeling lonely a reasonable amount of the time. So it is something that is a big health impact on our elderly. Now, there's complex reasons why elderly live on their own. Partly it's due to changing life circumstances, and that has been identified as a cause. And there's lots of research going into how do we maintain those ongoing social connections at some level. And shared living has been shown to lead to better health outcomes for people later in life. So how do we do these shared living arrangements without taking away the independence of the elderly, without taking away their own home? So this is part of where the whole sharing comes in, and how do we make that work? So this is the outline of the project that we are sort of discussing. So the UQ students have talked about this share house suitability, and like they said, they were looking at 2 demographic groups. We're expanding that to slightly more demographic groups, and to look at some similar things about what participants want and need. And then the second phase is to look at, well, how Anglicare can provide support for this share housing. Hopefully then moving on to a pilot program. More on that. So first stage is we're looking at different demographic groups. We're looking and ask them what they think about share housing. First, what they understand problems of current housing is, their current housing, also their existing attitudes to sharing. Do they have good experiences from the past? Do they have bad experiences? Is there an attitude shift that's needed? What concerns they have about housing, about who they're going to have house with, what concerns there. Also, what sort of physical requirements that they would need. So things like, well, what kind of privacy would be needed? What kind of locks on doors? What kind of space needs would be required? There's also arrangements needs. So price point, sharing of housework, all of those sorts of things. We'll be asking those, and we're speaking to each demographic group separately. So we'll be looking for, talking to, and we're setting up these focus groups now. So a focus group looking at elderly, so people 65 to 80, people who own their own home is our target. So they've lived in this place for some time and they're thinking of giving up part of their home to somebody they don't know. So we'd also want them to be fully, we don't want elderly. These are just people over 65 in that retirement group with full cognitive capacity. The next group, we wanted a general adult population. So we're looking at creating links to Anglican parishes and getting a adult group who's just 30 to 65 and no other connection to need. So seeing what their considerations would be around sharing. We're going to again do that young adult group that are coming out of care arrangements to see if we're getting a similar reaction, to see if our questions give similar results. So it's not a case of repeating the UQ's one. It's a case of we need to have the same set of questions given to each lot of demographic groups. And it's always interesting to see and compare different research groups coming out with the same results. The next one is interesting, the staff of Anglicare. And this is something that really struck us when Sue started talking to us about it, that they noticed staff, professionals who are working for Anglicare starting to have trouble finding rentals. And is this a match? Is this something that they can do to get housing that is outside of their work, but introduced through their work? And maybe there's some concerns with that, but it's an interesting group to hear what they're thinking about there. And then the last group we want to tap into is university students, contrasting those in some way with the young adults, but also just with the general adult population. That uni student demographic is in an interesting point of life in that they're looking for new experiences, but they have not got that full-time income, but they do have big time pressures. So they're the groups that we're hoping to talk to, and we're getting a collection of participants now and going to be looking to talk to them over the next month. So coming away from that, we want to have a better understanding of what the residents would like to see, what their needs are, what their considerations, what excites them, and what scares them about the concept of share housing. And then leading on to that, this service provision possibilities. So how can we apply that in the Anglicare context? So how can we get the staffing and managerial requirements? Are there legal and financial considerations for Anglicare? How can it keep going? And in fact, a lot of the research from other countries who have tried this in places has found that keeping this kind of schemes going long term has its problems involved. And how can we get this scheme to be self-funding and ongoing? And part of this will be looking at communication strategies. Where is a potential pilot location? Where can we test this out? And what would success look like for Anglicare? And to do that, we're talking to Anglicare and talking to people there, particularly key staff who are involved in specialties, as well as ideas from the general staff. Do they get that broad? How do we tap into that broader organised expertise? So we're hoping that some surveys, that there will be some ideas coming from Anglicare employees, and comparing existing international operational models to what can Anglicare do. So that's the second phase that we're hoping to do, and that's planned for 2025. And when we've got this idea of what the participants want and what Anglicare is capable of doing, and then running this pilot program, Anglicare is hoping to do that in 2026 if all goes well, and if we get the approval from Sue and her team gets the approval from Anglicare Southern Queensland. And then the final stage would then be evaluating that pilot and finding out, well, what did work, what didn't work? Is that pilot a sustainable program to keep going? Or is there things that need significant tweaking? And so that's the long-term research project there, and sort of the diagram of what we're thinking through there. Now, the final thing I want to come back to is kind of a bit more theoretical, and it's questioning again, well, what is housing? So our understanding of what is housing depends a bit on what you're thinking about or who you are, where you're working in it. It is actually a number of overlapping disciplines, and they interrelate a lot, but there are different ways to understand it. And I like to think through this as definitional differences. If we use slightly different words for housing, we get slightly different nuances. So I'll start at the bottom because it's one way to start. Sometimes we think of housing as property. It's an investment. This is a huge mindset in Australia. Our housing is very much tied up with financially doing well. So that is one way to think about housing. And we can address those financial concerns and talk about those. There's also the house, that physical form, be it a house or a unit or a caravan. There is different physical constructed forms, and they have to be a certain size. They have to be suitable for climate. Those physical arrangements for our housing are very important consideration. There's also a dwelling. So by that, I mean the way we live. So it meets our needs of how we live. It's a physical shelter. It's a place to sleep and eat and do our ablutions and things like that. So that practicality of living. But most significantly, a home has psychological connotations. Home is linked to safety, to belonging, to identity. Home is about family, about self-expression, about privacies. Some of these are very intangible elements. So a lot of this research and a lot of what we're discussing with the participants is about housing as a dwelling, as a physical place, as a financial commitment. But it's a lot harder to tap into a home and what clients want for their home. And getting people to discuss these ideas of home. And this is a potential problem, yeah? So it's hard to tap into that concept. And ultimately, people deciding whether they're going to commit to this program, it depends on their feelings around home. And then it depends on how Anglicare can help people transition from a preconceived ideas of home, be they idealized homes or even damaged ideas of homes. How can they transition to a place that can still be home while sharing it with someone else? So I just wanted to leave you with that idea of the complexity. So that's the end of my slides. And any questions?
Thank you, Anna. That was really, really interesting. Particularly interested at the end there where you drew out those distinctions between housing and a home, because they're very different things, aren't they? And it kind
Yes.
of, I popped a question in the chat just so that I would remember what it was that I wanted to come back to you about. So maybe if I ask that while other people are thinking about their questions, because I think it's actually related to that issue about the way people perceive, a place, a roof over their head or a home. And I became kind of interested in knowing what some of those sustainability challenges were that came out of the literature when you looked at some of the similar sorts of projects overseas. Was that sustainability about, the practical things, or was it actually about, people having that shared understanding of home?
A lot of it was about participants thinking it's a good idea, and then high staff demands of trying to find a good match, trying to find the compatibility, trying to negotiate these things between two strangers who are potentially going to live together. And then people pull out. So there is that pulling out or that reluctance to, I'm not sure this is a good match. I'm not sure. And that there's a lot of time and energy put in by support service to make these matches, and then a reluctance for people to step into them seemed to be one of the biggest hurdles of these previous programs. Well, that's certainly something that struck me in my reading of it.
So was there some success factors for those programs that have continued and do appear to be sustainable?
I think I'd have to do a lot more research into it before I can give you a list of success factors. Yeah.
Sorry, Leanne, and can I jump in a bit here? Just on the success, I think it sits where you were talking about before, Leanne, in that the transition from where we are participants in a supported program to we are community, and that, you know, but how is that built into the program structure itself, so that along with the supporting, the sharing, there's also a storing and expectancy around how they become or independent, autonomous households within a supported structure, because where there is a heavy reliance on funding for the organisation that's supporting the model, then that becomes subject to variability in government decision making and things like that can put pressure on projects, so that, and this figures into the sustainability of the program over lengths of time. So I think there's elements of both of those, and it'd be helpful to consider as we go into that model development, how do we support the autonomy of these house share arrangements and the sense of community and home over dwelling. And I think that you know, that's certainly something that would be interesting to look at as part of this project.
Thank you, Trudy. Actually, I think Travis has just put a question up there which speaks a little bit to the autonomy, I think. Would there be a lease arrangement with the usual terms around having to give notice if you wanted to leave, etc.? So, I mean, it's one model, isn't it? Which, of course, is part of the next piece of work. Yeah.
Yeah, and there would obviously have to be some agreement in place, but also there has to be some flexibility about that. I believe the UQ people said the idea of adaptability. Obviously, when you're going into a housing arrangement with a stranger, you want some surety, and you want to know, you know, is there a contract you can sign? But at the same time, you're trying to develop a relationship. So that's a balance that needs to be put in place. But yeah, we will certainly be talking about different lease arrangements with the participants and what they think is appropriate. Yeah.
That's definitely something in our...
Sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, no. In our focus groups and one-on-one interviews, that's definitely something that did come up, wanting a contract, but also wanting it to be something that they can come up with themselves, like sitting down and actually, you know, talking to the person before it's like set in stone kind of thing. And yet working through it one-on-one, dependent on the relationship they have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Jane, you've got a question.
I think Dylan had his hand up before me. So does Dylan want to go first? Dylan Andrews, he's got number one.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not actually even seeing that on my screen. Sorry, Dylan.
No, that's all right. I was just wondering whether technology, and like you've got apps like Tinder and you've got Airbnb and those sort of things that have a tendency to speed up the process and make it efficient. Has the use of technology been used in other projects that have been overseas, and is that something, I guess, what practically, how are you looking to try and make it a quick and efficient process to connect homeowners and tenants?
Tinder for home sharers.
I mean, that's something like we had talked about that, but I think not to stereotype, but like the people that we had our focus groups with, the elderly people, we don't know how computer competent they would be and how easy it would be to use that technology and stuff like that. So I don't know if there is just with the demographic, I don't know how possible it would be, and maybe that's something that could be researched in the future. I'm not sure, but yeah.
It could also be something perhaps that changes over time, because, you know, my age, for example, going forward, who are kind of used to the technology, would be quite different to somebody who's at 80 or 85 now. So, you know, if we had a sustainable program that ran for 20 or 30 years, that's going to make quite a big difference to how comfortable people are with technology, I guess. Yeah, sorry, Jan.
Thank you. My question's more about coercion, I guess. You know, there could be some form of expectation that if I've lived with you for 5 years, that I'm going to put in your will. And is there some sort of agreement that's going to be a bit like a prenup to say that no matter what happens here, you're never going to get your hands on this property? Just saying.
Yes, and I think that's something we really want to see if the participants come out with, see if it's a concern of theirs. I suspect it might be a concern of family, of particularly the older participants, and how do we get that family's concern captured? But yeah, no, that is something of, well, what does the long term look like here? Sorry, that's my dog.
Thanks, Anna.
That definitely came through in our research. One of our like major themes that came through was security, but it was interesting because it looked quite different from an elderly perspective to a care leaver perspective. Homeowners and the group that we interviewed, we did a focus group with, sorry, they were very conscious of property security, so very concerned about the idea of like stolen items and stuff like making sure their house is their house and personal property, whereas care leavers, their concern for security was more directed towards housing security. Based on their lived experience, they've obviously been bounced in and out of housing for a large portion of their life. So they are hesitant security wise to go into a project like this that could potentially end abruptly or end without their consent, sort of.
One of the interesting pieces of research that we came across when this project was, you know, initially being discussed was a report from a young woman. I'm just thinking of your point there about coercion, Jan, because it was actually the flip side of that, that this young woman felt that she was being coerced into giving a level of support that she'd never really signed up for the older person. And found that very, very difficult to manage. And so, yeah, it's a two-way thing, isn't it? We often think of it as being, you know, potentially that the older person is more vulnerable. In this particular case, it was the other side. So that was quite interesting. I'm just looking at, Tracy's got a question. Has there been any consideration of how a contract or a lease arrangement may affect any pension or principal place of residence status and tax implications for the homeowner? I suspect that's one of the things that Trudy and Anna will be looking at, yeah?
Yeah, and that's certainly risen in other house sharing, not with intergenerational house sharing, but other house sharing models. Even locally, that's been a consideration around impacts on Centrelink, what constitutes income when renting a house. And yeah, so I think that it's really important that there's some legal clarity around a variety of different scenarios that will arise in house sharing, intergenerational house sharing. And, you know, I think as has been made evident now, that the contracting itself is also going to be quite dynamic. Because depending on the nature of the circumstance, the needs and contracting parameters are probably going to be shifting as well in terms of what's emphasised. So I think fairly early on, it becomes clear that there is a legal area of specialty here, and maybe that's something that we hope the project's going to explore, is identifying people's awareness of that, at some level, identifying the presence and availability of that.
Thanks, Trudy. Are there any other comments or questions that people, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. We're about 5 minutes out. So we've probably got time for another question. If anyone has something that they would like to, a pressing issue they'd like to raise. No? Okay.
Well, actually, could I just ask a question? I was really interested. from the UQ researchers about the orientation of young people leaving care. You know, what was their impression about the idea as a whole? Did you get a sense of energy from them around it, that they were moving towards it? Or, yeah, just, perhaps if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the care leavers that we spoke to had already turned 18, so they were already out of the system. It was really varied. We had a lot of different perspectives and opinions. Some left care to go back with their family. A lot didn't really have options. So some did also face homelessness. So it wasn't necessarily excitement, more a lot of, like, I guess, they've had a lot of hardship in the time between leaving care and finding stable housing now. So,
yeah.
But I think it was also interesting, the idea, like, for one of the participants, they were living by themselves now. They just got a rental by themselves, and I think that was something they were so excited about, like having that. And as a secure thing, they've got a contract, they've got it all set in stone now. So they were really, yeah, excited by that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, oh, did I hear somebody else? Another question? Last one? Okay, we're good. Look, thank you so much, very much to our speakers today, to Anna and Trudy, to Erin, Mia and Sarah and Wish, and Sue. I'm sorry, Sue. Thank you so much for, for what you brought to today's webinar. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm very keen to, perhaps have another one of these in a year's time and see what the outcomes from Anna and Trudy's research will be. We're going to be following up fairly shortly with a link to the recording and a couple of brief questions for your feedback, if possible. That would be great if you could answer that. I'm actually just going to, and I think Sarah Maris is going to pop into the chat an opportunity for a brief advertisement. We have a new LinkedIn page, which is called, if you do a search, if you're on LinkedIn, here we go, I've got the link there for you, for Research Evaluation Advocacy Anglicare Southern Queensland. So we're going to be advertising future webinars there, and also, some, I guess, highlights of the type of research we do, and we'll probably put a little bit about this webinar on there as well. So please follow us if you'd like to sort of stay in touch. And I think that's pretty much it. We'd hope to, oh, one other thing quickly, there is a landing page for this project, which Sarah's just put up. Great. It at the moment is literally just a landing page, but we will be using that to as a kind of gathering point for information about this project as it develops. So please, if you're interested in the topic, particularly interested in the topic, keep an eye on that, and we'll put notes on LinkedIn as we add to the information that's available on that page. And other than that, thank you again, and we hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.